This is Amanda Edwards, and I'd like to welcome you to the Edwards Empowerment Talks. This podcast provides a platform to empower individuals and the community by showcasing stories of resilient people who have refused to let life's challenges prevent them from achieving their dreams. The Edwards Empowerment Talks will also highlight the work being done in the community that will help to positively shift the trajectory of this nation through stories of adversity, perseverance, drive, struggle, and success. The podcast will empower others to believe in their dreams and pursue those dreams despite whatever challenges may come their way. It is also a vehicle to equip the community with the tools necessary to be the change they want to see. I welcome you to tune in. You don't want to miss this. Well, welcome to the next episode of the Edwards Empowerment Talks. I am so excited to be here today because I am joined by the one and only Pastor Juanita Rasmus. Now, I said she was a pastor, and that is, of course, one of the many things that she does in our community. She not only has been a pastor of so many people in our community, but also she has helped to enlighten and empower people through her work as an author, spiritual leader, cancer survivor, and so much more. She is such an inspiration to us, not in terms of just the words that she says, but also what she does, and then how she empowers others to embrace those theories of change. I'm so excited to have her on. So, Pastor Juanita, welcome to the Edwards Empowerment Talks. How are you today?
Hey, I am so glad to be with you and your audience. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I think the world of you, and you know that, and just what you've done at St. John's, and just in the world, and the way that you extend yourself. I also want to thank you for not only extending yourself to me, but also to so many others, and being really someone who really has been devoted to the message that you preach. And I just want to thank you, and I'm excited to have you share some words of empowerment, some wisdom, your personal experiences with our listeners and our viewers here on the show today. So I'm super excited.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Amanda.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we start off talking about the state of the world, and the book, and the work that you do in the community, I want my listeners and viewers to get a little bit more of a feel for who you were growing up, your background experiences before you became Pastor Juanita Rasmus of St. John's, before you became an author of your newest released book, and before you actually got in the world and just really became a motivation for all of us to follow. Tell us a little bit about who you were growing up, and who did you think you were going to become?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow. Whoa.
Who did you think Pastor Juanita was going to
be? Well, I didn't think I was going to be a pastor. I can tell you that. Although there were some signs, even at a very early age. And I say there were signs, but my faith tradition didn't honor or acknowledge women as pastoral leaders. Mm-hmm. And so that for me meant I just kind of pushed that out of the way. Mm-hmm. Until later on, obviously the opportunity and the space was created, and I was able to walk in. But as a child, I grew up in Fifth Ward, Texas, mm-hmm. Fifth Ward, Houston, mm-hmm. In a community called Frenchtown. Mm-hmm. And I, one of the beautiful things about having grown up in Fifth Ward was that we were surrounded by forces of nature, like Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland, Kirby John Caldwell, so many others who grew up and came up out of Fifth Ward and had the experience of literally being drum majors, not only for our community, but for our city and our state and our nation ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. So there was always, for me as a kid, there was always this sense of possibility. There was always this sense of, if you can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. Now, part of that really came as well from my father and my mother. My parents, when I was a little girl, and Amanda, you're way too young to know about Napoleon Hill and Earl Nightingale, but
Yeah.
these were motivational speakers, and my dad connected our stereo so that there was a speaker in my sister and our bedroom, and then in my parents' bedroom. So at night, he would put on motivational long playing albums. So while we're sleeping, we were hearing Think and Grow Rich, and we were hearing what the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. And at a point, my parents moved us to Alief, wanting a better quality of education. At least that's what their desire was. Basically, as a kid, the one thing I can say consistently is that I was the adult child.
Okay.
You know, I was, if you look at the 5 childhood roles in the dysfunctional family system, and it's not to say that my family was just so crazily dysfunctional, but I think all of us have dysfunction. If nothing else, I tell my daughters all the time, hey, look, I not only save for college, but I'll pay for your therapy because I was your mother. I didn't know what I was doing. I just did my best, right? And so
continued learning, right?
Exactly. You know, my husband would always say, "Man, parenting is a crapshoot," and really, in many ways, it felt like that. You know, so when I look at my childhood, my earliest identity was wanting to be a good girl. Wanting and needing other people's acceptance and approval, their pats on the back, their affirmation. I was the kid in Miss Della Hogan's class in Langston Elementary who was the teacher's pet. When she locked up her purse, she would say, "Juanita, watch my purse." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that was very much a part of who I was. And it was shaping me in indelible ways that would later have to be addressed. I was the hero child, the one who didn't want to make a mistake, the one who wanted to make sure she followed all the rules.
You sound like me.
Amanda, when I met you, I said, I know her. I know her.
You know her. You've seen her before, huh?
I've seen her before. And so that very much drove me. You know, in high school, I was the only African American in my high school class in 9th grade. It was
so
a brand new school.
This is the Alief before it got diverse.
Alief Elsick. Exactly. I was in the first graduating class of Alief Elsick. I was the only African American as a freshman in my school. And then, of course, a few others came. But even by the time I graduated, I don't think there was more than 10 African Americans in our class. I was in student council. I was in Spanish club. I was in library club.
Whatever club they were gonna create, you were gonna be a part and lead.
I was going exactly. But not only that, I think one of the things that stands out when I look back, especially at my high school years, my best friends were the outcasts. They weren't in the popular groups. I think I was given permission to be in all of those groups, but that wasn't necessarily where I felt most comfortable. Because even then I was living by rules, you know, and I was in a school where there was a lot of stuff going on that was breaking all the rules. Okay. So I didn't get invited to the parties because I wasn't going down like that, you know? And so all of that came to shape who I am now. And certainly some of that narrative has had to be adjusted because you find out some rules are meant to be broken. When we see injustice, so forth.
You had also, I think, the willingness for you to step outside of the popular way was also, I think, a willingness to create and be a leader in the way that you thought was the right way to approach things. So
exactly. And I had a very strong moral code. There's in learning to be, I talk about an Enneagram. It's a personality profile, and on the Enneagram, I'm a 1, and we're very morally wired. We're wired towards what's right, what is good, what is appropriate, that kind of thing. So a lot of that is still very much in me. I'm learning how to work with those aspects of myself that have been in some ways limiting or in some ways condemning, and writing a new narrative, changing and looking at my beliefs and then going from there. So it's kind of, two-parent family home. My parents are still married and they are happily ever after. This is their 60th year. Matter of fact, this past year was their 60th wedding anniversary.
Oh,
They
that's
live one street behind me. My
oh.
mother-in-law lives next door. My husband says we have a compound. All right. So the family is very important to me. My daughter, my oldest daughter lives 2 streets over. Our youngest daughter lives in Indianapolis, but she and her husband have decided that they're going to move to Houston. And so
So you'll have the
they
full
won't,
compound.
hey, so hopefully they won't live too far from the compound.
Well, that's extraordinary that your parents are still together, and that you get a chance to kind of have this connectedness within your family still, because a lot of that, even if people are still living, you get a little splintered or disconnected. And so I think that takes a special person to be able to pull people together and keep them together in that way. And I'm curious how that evolution came to be when you met Pastor Rudy, for example, and then of course, you had your children. Tell me a little bit about that experience and then how that tied into you becoming Pastor Juanita.
All right. Well, let me tell you, they say opposites attract, right? And so if I was the good girl, he was the bad boy, all right? And literally, we met at a funeral.
Okay.
And my great aunt was married to his great uncle. I had never seen him before in my life. And my daughters always jokingly say, y'all know y'all cousins, right? But we're not. We are not cousins, all right? It was marriage.
Listen, this is the Gulf Coast now. This is the Gulf Coast.
No, we are not cousins. Matter of fact, we've done our DNA.
You've done the DNA test to prove
right.
it.
We
That's
are not
right.
related, all right? But we met at a funeral. My husband said he saw my legs. And then he said he couldn't think about the funeral anymore. And so I just give God thanks for my legs from my mama. But my husband asked his mom, who is that at the funeral? And she said, well, that's Silver's niece. And Silver is my dad's sister, my aunt. Mm-hmm. And so he said, well, show me Silver, right? So his mom introduced him to my aunt. Then my aunt introduced him to my mother. And then my mother introduced me to him at the funeral.
Okay.
And we dated for a year. Mm-hmm. And I just, I admired him. There was a quality about him. And now I know partially it's a kind of loyalty that he has in friendships and in relationships. Mm-hmm. I loved that he, unlike, I'm kind of an old soul. And so in many ways, it would not have surprised me if I had married somebody 10 years older than me or more. But Rudy's only 5 years older than me, but I tell him all the time he's married to a much younger woman. Just remind him, right? But what I saw in him was integrity. Mm-hmm. And I had seen that in my dad, and I knew what integrity looked like. It means you stay the course, right?
Right.
And so we dated for a year. And then I got to see some other stuff, that he was a male chauvinist. I wasn't going down like that, right? I was like, wait a minute, this guy wants me barefoot and pregnant. And I got things I plan on doing in the world, right? And so we went to dinner. We during that time that we dated that first year, we never had an argument. Everything was always cool. He wined and dined me, and that was great because I'm old-fashioned in that regard. I appreciate chivalry in a man. And so we went to dinner one night, and I just remember at that dinner thinking to myself, I'm not going out with this guy anymore.
You gonna dump Pastor Rudy?
But look, I didn't even have to. Let me show you how it worked out. We had a great date. He drove me home. He kissed me goodbye. The next day, we would always call each other and say, how much fun we had, blah, 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 when we're going to get together again or whatever. And he didn't call me and I didn't call him for a year.
What?
Right?
So
for
no. So y'all didn't have an argument?
Whole year.
It was not an argument?
No argument. No argument. We had a wonderful evening. It was typical of all of our dates. We had a great evening. But here's what happened. While inside of me, I was sensing this guy's a chauvinist. And I need to have a person who's going to see me as an equal partner, right? In him, because of the kind of life he had lived, let's just say he was on the borders, okay? And he said before he accepted a relationship with Christ, he said there was always this voice that would tell him, get out, leave, or it would give him instructions when he was in kind of dangerous situations. And that voice that night while we were at dinner said to him, don't do anything to make this woman distrust you. And he felt he was untrustworthy as it related to his relationship with women. And so we just didn't call each other for a year, right? And so,
and the fact that you had your own instincts,
yes,
and he had a completely different reason and different
exactly.
And so, were you mad?
No, I'm telling you. Let me tell you.
I'd be mad.
I wasn't. Why? Because I'd already made my decision.
That's true.
And so it wasn't about he didn't call. It was just I had made a decision, so it made it easier that he didn't call the next day, and that but in that year, or at the end of a year, we my father and I were in business together, and we sold insurance and retirement plans and so forth, and we would always have a holiday gathering for our clients, right? And so I was at that gathering, and all the guests had left, and so it was just my parents and I and some other people who work in our office at the time, and we were just sitting there kind of chilling after the party's over, right? And my dad said, I wish you would date somebody nice like Rudy.
Your dad said that?
My daddy said that.
And this is after y'all hadn't been talking for a year.
Oh, a year, right?
Did he know that y'all weren't talking for a year?
Well, he didn't see him, so he assumed it wasn't, he wasn't in my life. But I was dating someone, and I don't consider myself dating this person, but I was, on occasion, I would go to lunch with this person who was like 10 or 15 years older than me, right? And so I think that kind of is why my dad said that, and that he really appreciated Rudy.
Right.
But that night was like a Friday night, right? Tell me why the next morning Rudy called me and said, I just wanted to check on you and see if we might be able to go to lunch together.
No,
are you available? Yes,
the next day after your dad said that, they must have been in cahoots.
They swear, my husband says my dad paid him. He don't have that much money.
That's not true. He probably asked, if he could have asked your dad, you think she'll go to lunch with me if I ask tomorrow?
I don't think so. Anyway, for me, it was a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That Rudy needed a year to work through some stuff. And I think he did, I think that message that he got, because all the other messages he had gotten had been about his safety, about situations that he had placed himself in, and he needed to exit a room, as an example, or leave this meeting, get up out of here, that kind of thing. But I think over that year, and I can't speak for him, I don't know what all was going on with him, but I'm just saying from my side, I met a different Rudy. The integrity was still there, but the willingness to see me as an equal had become something different, right? And that was helpful because we got back to dating something like in maybe October. One day Rudy owned a motel again, gray areas, okay, gray areas.
Look, no judgment free zone. Judgment free zone.
And he writes all about this in his first book, Touch. So I ain't sharing nothing that hadn't been shared. And so one night we were at the motel. He was working the night shift because he tended to work the night shift. He sold real estate by day, but at night he would do the night shift. And so sometimes I would meet him there. And so I was sitting across the desk from him. He was reading, I'll always remember this. He was reading the Houston Business Journal, right?
Okay.
And I was reading a magazine called Life Insurance Selling because it was a magazine for my industry. So I'm sitting there reading the magazine. He's reading that, the Houston Business Journal. And he says, so when you want to get this over with anyway? And I said, what about January? He says, what about June? And then I said, what about March? He said, okay, March is fine. That was my proposal.
That was not your proposal.
Yes, it was.
And the fact that you knew that was your proposal.
Knew
I would have been
exactly
saying,
what he
like,
was
what are
talking
you
about.
talking about?
Exactly. I knew exactly. And we had not been talking about marriage, Amanda. That's the wild thing. And so for me, this was so much of our connection was about a spiritual connection.
Yeah.
And that sense of knowing what he was thinking without
Yeah.
him explaining it, right?
Yeah.
And he had never told me he loved me.
So how?
And he didn't tell
So
me
wait
that.
a minute. He didn't. So you got a marriage proposal
From a
before the
man
man
who
said he loved you.
never told me he loved me. All right. And
Because you knew what he was thinking.
I knew what he was thinking. And because he said he didn't play with the notion of love.
Tell me what that means.
And you'd have to ask him really what that means. But I know a little bit about the volatility of some of his previous relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that for him to make the commitment to loving
Mm-hmm.
meant being on a totally different kind of level.
Okay.
And I don't think that, and so for him, that wasn't, you don't just throw out, I love you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so, matter of fact, the first time he told me he loved me was when he gave me my engagement ring.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote it in a card, I love you. And
oh, wow.
So, you know, he's been, I tell you, it's been an incredible journey. So we get married that March the 9th. 2 years later, we have our first baby. And at this point, probably about 4 years after that, well, actually, when we got married, we started attending Windsor Village with Pastor Kirby John Caldwell.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there that I started sensing that God was calling me into ministry.
So wait, let's back up, because you were still working with your father in the insurance business.
Right, that's right. And
So
I continued to do that.
And were you content there? Were you content
Yes,
in terms of doing that work?
Yes, I loved it. I loved insurance sales and security sales. And it was something that now I know one reason why I loved it, because the approach I took to sales was one of educating people. And so I see that one of my primary gifts is that as a teacher and as an educator, right?
Yeah.
And so that made it very easy. So it could have been anything. As long as I had a role where I was able to teach people, it would have been satisfying. Yeah. And so we started our family. We had 2 daughters. We're attending Windsor Village, and I'm feeling like I said, God is calling me in the ministry. But having grown up in the denomination that I've been in, where I was always told women were not called to preach, no woman would ever step foot in this pulpit, that kind of stuff. I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling, what I was sensing. So I just started doing work at Windsor. I got involved in a ministry there, the stewardship ministry, which meant I really got to teach people the stuff I was kind of teaching my clients, right? Money management, basic ideas of, except how to apply biblical tools to managing finances, and how to live generously, and how to be open to engaging the community and the world with your resources, because that's why we've been given them, right? How to serve, and the willingness to identify your spiritual gifts, all that kind of thing. And then on occasion, I got a chance to preach. And I realized that I was investing more time preparing for a Bible study I was going to teach at Windsor than I was preparing to see my clients.
Yeah. And
I started realizing that there was something very life-giving for me about that experience.
And so let me ask this question, because I know it's probably very different for everybody, but if somebody out there is wondering if they have a calling to ministry in the way that you have been called to ministry, what you mentioned that there was like the things that you had been feeling. Can you share a little bit about what that is, in case that's something that someone else is kind of like, is this something I can channel into activities that I do, but stay the course in terms of my professional experience, or I really do need to make the transition from this being my profession in my life's devotion? for you, I know it's different for each
It
person, but
is. It
how
really
did you
is.
figure that? I know that you mentioned that you were focusing so much on that, but what were you sensing?
Okay. What I was sensing was the energy that I
Hmm.
got from the experiences and
Okay.
how much I loved it. Okay.
So
But it
fulfillment.
would it would be a while before ministry presented itself as a full-time vocation. Okay.
Yeah.
I continued to sell insurance for another probably 7 years or so,
Okay.
because it was very life-giving for me. It was feeding our family. But
Hmm.
then at one point, the Spirit said to me, start a Bible study in your home. And so I did.
Hmm.
And I did a Wednesday noon Bible study. I sent flyers to all of my neighbors and invited them to come.
Hmm.
And every Wednesday we had a group of, sometimes it was usually a very intimate group, 5 to 7 women who would show up for this Bible study. And it was just, it was electrifying how good I would feel after having done those Bible studies, right?
Hmm.
And then at a point, the Spirit said, take the Bible study to the church. And I'm thinking, what church, right?
Hmm.
Um, Around that time, and I'm thinking perhaps it's the church that's in my subdivision. So I thought, oh, okay. So God just wants me to move where I'm having it and put it in this building, right? Well, um, during the same time, Rudy is attending a Bible study
Hmm.
called Nothing But the Brothers,
Okay.
with that's being facilitated by a brother named Willie Lane, who's now one of the ministers at Windsor Village, and he is being discipled.
Okay.
All the questions that he had about um, a faith walk were being answered because Rudy had been a marginal Muslim
Okay.
before, and he had studied Buddhism as well. So the thing I saw in Rudy was that he was looking,
Hmm.
and I was open to that. That the fact that he was looking. He wasn't a Christian when we got married. But he he said he went to church because his daddy told him wherever your woman go, you go, and so he did. And Kirby John befriended him,
Hmm.
knowing his background and engaging Rudy, asking Rudy to help with real estate stuff at the church and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so one day, Kirby John called Rudy and said, "Oh, I have to say," and Rudy began to experience the call to ministry. We would talk about it, and we
Hmm.
began to feel that God was going to direct us into urban ministry, but we didn't know how. We kept thinking it was the neighborhood church near us because at the time we lived inside of the 610 loop, and really we lived inside of I-10.
Hmm.
And so we would kept thinking, well, maybe it's the neighborhood church that God is asking us to go to.
Hmm.
Again, neither of us have been trained as pastors. We didn't have a clue. We were just feeling our way
Yes.
through based on what we were sensing and what we're hearing in prayer and that kind of thing, the internal guidance, right?
Hmm.
And so Kirby John called him and said, the denomination is going to close this church downtown because it doesn't have enough members, and they're thinking about giving it to Kirby John as to be senior pastor. And so Kirby John called Rudy and said, would you go downtown, check out this church, and tell me what you think? So Rudy goes to the church. He parks his car on the parking lot. He calls me. He said, baby, this is the place. This is where we're supposed to be. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow.
And so when we got to church, Kirby John asked us if we would go downtown and see what we can do. And so we started by providing meals to the homeless community. We provided then showers and laundry facility. We converted the parsonage that was next door, and then ultimately built a building and built housing. And so the rest, is $30 million worth of housing later, and providing services now to those who are affected by the impact of COVID-19. So we're distributing 2,000 families, Amanda, every week. We're their grocery store.
Yeah. And the one thing that's so incredible about St. John's is not just, and now I'm gonna sing your praises, but for those that are not familiar, one of the things I absolutely love about your church is how open you are to people from any walk of life. It doesn't matter what your life circumstance is, and it really is a space and place that embraces people with love and support and helps to empower people. So your housing, Bread of Life ministry. I've partnered with you guys a number of times in terms of getting supplies out when Harvey happened. I mean, y'all also are Disaster Recovery Central.
We are. We
And
absolutely are. That's
all
been
sorts,
the
yeah.
transition for us. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been remarkable what you've been able to build, the confidence that the broader community has with St. John's, because I will say this too, it's not just people who are aligned faith-wise with your church that really partner and engage you. It's all sorts of folk, like you said, bringing the community together and managed to do that extremely well. Now, this is many years later. Tell me about the beginning stages, because I know there had to be some setbacks, like, you know, with the empowerment talks. Yeah, we like to talk about the successes, but I really like to get into some of the setbacks, because a lot of people who are listening they might be in a setback right now, or they might feel discouraged about a mountain they have to climb that seems too large. And so what were some of the major, I'm not going to say go through the chronology of all things, but early on, that, you know, how overwhelmed were you? Did you want to, you said immediately that y'all felt like this was the space for you.
Yeah.
Was there ever a fear or a desire to step back or not embark upon his journey out of, you know, fear for the unknown? Because neither one of y'all have been pastors before.
No, we hadn't been pastors, but the thing that we both have been entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And we come from families of entrepreneurs. And so we understand what that means.
Yeah.
That means that you're going to have a lot of disorientation. Then there are going to be periods of orientation. Then there are going to be periods of reorientation. And so we certainly saw that. You know, we started with 9 members, and those were 9 white members who at the time were all in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. All right.
Wow.
And then the congregation began to grow around the homeless community and the work we were doing there. Then the next wave of population came from men and women who were in recovery and saw St. John's as a safe place for a number of reasons, one of which I have to credit Rudy with, because Rudy told me one day that in essence, when he was in the motel business, which created when he accepted Christ, there was now this sense of the damage that owning that motel had created in our neighborhood. All right. And so he stopped taking income from the motel. Well, I was still in sales, and that affected our income a great deal to not have, in essence, that steady cash flow coming in. And then shortly after that, we realized we needed to be involved full time in ministry, but we didn't have salary. Neither one of us did. All right. And so one of the very first hurdles was, how are we going to feed our kids?
Right.
But one of the things that happened for us is that a few years before this opportunity to be in ministry full time happened, I was driving to our office and the Spirit said, buy real estate. Well, Rudy was a real estate broker, right? But we had never thought to buy real estate for ourselves.
Yeah.
And not only was he a real estate broker, but at the time he sold real estate that had been foreclosed on by banks. So he had an extensive list of banks that he worked with all this inventory that he was selling. And then ultimately I got my real estate license to help him sell it, right? And so one of the things we did was we started buying real estate that we could afford to buy at that time. And I will always remember, Amanda, there was a piece of property on the list that was $500. It was in Bryan College Station. Well, Rudy's mom's family is from Caldwell, which is near College Station. And so we immediately picked up that piece of property, and we picked up a few other pieces along the way, right? This is when we had cash flow.
Yeah.
This is before we're in the church, right? And so what God then said to us once we got in ministry, sell some real estate. So we would sell some of the property we had previously bought, and that's how we paid for our ability to stay in ministry, because we weren't getting a salary. You know, what kind of salary do you get with 9 people? you know? And so for us, our story has been so much like Paul in the scripture, the tent maker. He
Yes.
earned his living by making a tent.
Yes.
He earned his way of being by being a pastor, right? And so his being came from the pastorate, but his cash flow came from selling some tents every now and then. And so that's, you know, for at least 3 years. We didn't, our first, and matter of fact, I didn't get paid for 3 years. Rudy's first check was $1,500, and that was 3 years in the ministry. We had 3,500 members at that point.
Wow. So you went from 9 members to 3,500 people
in
the
7 years.
Church. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so tell me, okay, as this is happening, right? Yeah. You've got your family, you're building the church, you're expanding on all of these different ministries. Personally, what were you going through? I know that in the book, and we'll get to the book, but you know, you reveal a lot about your personal experiences and your battles with depression. Yeah. And I know, you know, you eventually come to a point where there's a crash. And so kind of help me on a parallel journey of what's happening with the church. Meanwhile, what's happening with Pastor Juanita as a human?
Sure. Well, let me tell you, so much of what was happening is I related to addiction, right? Here I am, a person who has a need for acceptance and approval and performance addiction and pats on the back, right? And so we're getting awards from our denomination because every year the church is growing by 300 to 500 members. I'm going, yes, I'm geeking. I'm geeking, okay? I'm jonesing, all right? Because there's a great satisfaction in being able to stand up and preach and teach and being able to do that. I was doing 2 Bible studies a week. I was preaching every other Sunday because Rudy and I, after a point, Kirby John was no longer preaching there. And so it was just Rudy and I. So we rotated every other Sunday. One of us would preach, but I consistently did 2 Bible studies, one on Wednesday at noon and one Wednesday night. Remember the Bible study that I was telling you I did in my home? When God said, take it to the church, little did I know he meant take it to St. John's. I didn't even know about St. John's at the time, right? So ultimately, I moved that Bible study to St. John's downtown. It grows crazy. At the time, there was a bus stop that stopped in front of St. John's, and downtown did this kind of a loop bus where you could be downtown, hop on the bus, and it would drop you off in front of St. John's and other stops. But it gave business people an opportunity during their lunch hour to come to Bible study. Now you've got all these dynamics going on that God is orchestrating, and we're just trying to keep up with. What's the next step? What's the next right thing to do? And so there was a lot of energy. You can see it. I'm getting all excited, right?
Yeah,
because I'm using all this energy and I'm loving it until I'm not.
Yeah.
Until the place where it takes everything I have to get out of bed, and I'm filled with anxiety, because not so much just because of the impact of the work, but because I'm having to try to keep up. Rudy and I have always taken the list of priorities in our marriage and in our business, and then ultimately in ministry, and we tore the list in half. You do what you're good at, I do what I'm good at, and we make it happen, right? And so while that worked in the beginning, the more the church was growing, the more the demand for our time and our energy. And here I am also trying to be the mother to some young children. Our kids were 3 and 4 when we started. By the time I experienced the crash, they were in middle school. So you see, there are these dynamics of growth that nobody tells you how to manage. I didn't know that I needed to be taking care of myself. Rudy and I were working almost 7 days a week. Why? Because the need was so great that we didn't feel like
you were building.
Exactly. Those were definitely the building years. Yeah. And so you get this measure of satisfaction that gives you this kind of high that keeps you going, but it doesn't sustain. You know, and I didn't know of the necessities of spiritual practices like retreats, taking days off, you know, learning how to not feel like I had to be there first thing in the morning and last thing at night, because it was so fulfilling
Right. Because you
very
loved it and you were
seductive.
walking in your purpose and your mission,
Exactly.
you felt like, just give me some more and I can take it. And I was able to
Exactly.
take it. I've been doing all of this.
That's right.
This is what we do.
But
And it's a
here's
blessing
what,
to be here.
yes. And I'm working for God. Who
Yes.
more can I ask for, right? And so what I want to say to your audience is that working in your passion can be seductive.
Yeah.
Notice what you're noticing.
Yeah.
Notice when you're dragging. Notice when you haven't had a day off. Notice when you haven't taken time to go to the movies or have a good dinner with your family. Notice when you find yourself 24/7 thinking about what you're doing. See, with Rudy and I both doing it, that meant we woke up talking about St. John's. We went to bed talking about St. John's. That's not healthy for a marriage.
No.
And so, but we can see all that 2020 hindsight,
Yeah.
But I want to say that it's important to notice what gives you life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to set healthy boundaries. Now, somebody might be saying, but how do you set a healthy boundary?
And why? And if you're the person, because I'm guilty of this, obviously we have some similarities, right?
Yes, we do.
If I'm the person who says, I have the energy to do it, why not just keep doing it? I love it.
Right.
Tell me why, and even if I'm not noticing signs of fatigue or any of those things, tell me why I need to set those boundaries. Like, why do I need to identify that boundaries are necessary just as a sustaining measure for yourself? No matter whether you love what you're doing or you don't like what you're doing,
sure,
boundaries being necessary.
Well, let's think of it this way. If you're a car,
yep,
you have a system within that car that will every now and then flash a red light and say, warning, you need to get some help, right? Oil change, engine, whatever, coolant, whatever. As human beings, we typically don't have warning lights. Okay. And so we have to learn to set some boundaries. And so I'll tell you what Pastor Joe Ratcliffe told us, that every 7 days you should take a day off.
Okay.
Every 7 months you
like a whole
should
day
take
or like a
whole day. A whole day. A whole day, Amanda. Every 7 weeks you should take a week off. Every 7 months you should take a month off. All right. Now let me tell you why that's important. Exactly. And because when you are grinding day to day and you're so into it, sometimes you're only seeing it at the right here level. When we take time off, it gives us the ability to see from 30,000 feet above.
So even if you're not tired, you being able to have a macro and a micro perspective. Right now we have micro because we're in it, we're in the weeds.
That's right.
To be able to take the step back, process.
Right.
So for those who are still saying, I don't need a break, just, I'm not tired. Right. The break is not.
And I said that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not tired. I don't need a break. We can keep doing. I'll go pick up the kids from school and bring them to church, and they can stay with us till we do the last Bible study for tonight.
It was adrenaline, just flowing, constant adrenaline.
Exactly. And adrenaline is needed to begin something.
Yeah.
But adrenaline will not sustain.
I love that.
Okay. It's needed to get you started, but it won't sustain. Think about it. When you find a person that you think is going to be a companion for you, there's adrenaline going, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to see that there's some engine problems. And
you're like,
right. You say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we take a break and we go somewhere away from that person. And then we realize, wait a minute. The last time that person said XYZ to me, I felt some kind of way about that. and so I use the relationship because many of us have had that experience, right? And so you have to use some measure of observation and discernment. And when you're too close on something, you don't often have that observation and discernment to work on your behalf. Give yourself a break so that you can be refreshed and renewed, and then you can ask yourself the real questions. What's giving me life here? What is it that's no longer life-giving?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that's sucking the life out of me?
So the
Right.
things that you once loved and thought that fed who you were and your soul and your essence and your mission and your purpose, sometimes that changes.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so one of the things that happened for me is that over time, I was saying yes to too many things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes to, okay, so people would call and say, would you come speak here? Would you say the prayer there? Would you do a retreat? And so here I am addicted. And I remember, and this is something I tell pastors around the country, because Rudy and I do a lot of pastors conferences. I will say to them, it is not your gifts that brought you to ministry.
Hmm.
The gifts can be used in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But what brought you to ministry is your need for healing.
Hmm.
And I would dare say that what brings many of us, our passions bring us to the place where we can get our healing.
Mm-hmm. And
Okay.
you feel the reward, or you feel charged up from the work that you're doing. And that's
Yeah,
something that fills you up.
sure. But then you got to ask yourself, am I a human being or a human doing? And I had
Oh, I
become a
like
human
that. Say that
doing.
one more time.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, am I a human being? Am I learning to be my most expansive self, or am I learning to check things off my to-do list?
Oh
Because
no,
I've
don't
become
talk
a
about the
human.
to-do list.
Okay. Because I've become a human doing, and I have become a human doing. I've become a human doing on my job, with my children, in my marriage. Everything was checking off the list. What's on the
Mm-hmm.
list? And what happens when you live out of that kind of space? There's no space for joy. There's
Mm.
no space for, dare I say, pleasure and ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And those are real experiences that we're invited to have, not illegally or immorally, but that those are emotional releases that as human beings, we are built to experience, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're always just doing, where's the space for being?
Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
being present to what it's like to see a sunrise,
Mm-hmm.
to being present to the aroma of chili cooking over the stove on a hot day and you didn't cook it, right? Right. To pay attention to the fire in the fireplace, to be able to really smell the incense you lit, to reflect on what's given you life, what's been life giving. And so in learning to be, one of the practices I offer, because I didn't know it at the time, was
Mm-hmm.
the examine. EXAMEN. You can Google it, but also talk about it in learning to be. The examine is a spiritual practice that Saint Ignatius of Loyola in the 13th century taught his monks.
Okay.
Why? Because he said, you guys are busy. Y'all are real busy. Because they not only worked in the monastery, but they often had jobs
Mm-hmm.
outside of the monastery. So he said, you might miss mass in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You might miss the hours of prayer because of your job, but do not forsake the examine. And the examine goes like this: at the end of the night, when it's quiet, right before you go into bed, sit in a chair. Don't sit on the bed because you'll probably fall asleep. Sit in a quiet space, sit in the chair, right? Invite spirit to help you review your day. And you look for the places that you were able to give and receive love. You look for what fed your soul. You look for the places throughout the day where love flowed your way, where life came at you. Like yesterday, I was on a Zoom call, and my husband lightly knocked on my door, which is behind me, right? And my banner keeps people from seeing if he's coming in and out of my study or not, right? And so he opened the door, and I sensed him, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that he had brought me a dozen orange roses and he put
Oh.
them on my desk, right? We can get so busy
Yeah.
that we miss how love is flowing in us, flowing towards us, flowing to us. Love isn't always roses. Sometimes love flows as wisdom. Sometimes
Yeah.
the love flows as insight. Sometimes the love flows as a longing. I longed, and I talked about this in learning to be, I longed to go skydiving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to ask yourself, why am I putting it off? Why am I not engaging in these ways of being that are coming up within me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those ways of being, those places of longing are designed to be fuel for our living. But if we turn off all those ways that fuel can flow into our lives, we'll find ourselves on empty. And that's what happened for me.
Yeah.
I remember, give you a good example. I remember I used to invest 20 hours a week preparing for my sermon, right? And so sometimes that bled into family time. If there was too much going on during the day, I'd have to. And so I remember one particular time, I will always remember this. My family had planned that Friday night we were going to watch this movie. And so we got popcorn and all the stuff. We were going to make a family movie night here at the house, the girls, Rudy and I. And so that Friday night, I'm like, y'all, my sermon is not coming together. I'm going to have to miss the movie. My girls were so disappointed. But I was so driven, right, that I got to get this sermon done. And so I go in, I'm sitting at my computer, and the Spirit says, no, after a while, I just can't, the sermon didn't come together. And then the Spirit says, go watch the movie. And I'm like, I can't go watch the movie. I got to get this sermon done.
I have work to do.
It's the Spirit telling me, go watch the movie. And I'm saying, who are you, Spirit? Don't you know I got to get this sermon done? So finally, I get up and I go watch the movie. And the girls are like, yay, Mama, you came in to watch the movie. Well, fortunately, it was probably 15 minutes into the movie, right?
Okay.
I sit and watch the movie with them. First of all, my kids are huddled around me. My husband is sitting next to me. We're having this quality time.
Yeah.
Kids grow up really fast.
Yeah.
They're 33 and 32.
Yeah.
I'll never get that moment again, right? I'm sitting there enjoying the movie, and the ending that I was longing for my sermon was in the movie. The illustration was in the movie. That's why we have to pay attention to what our heart longs for. What are we, the need to go to the beach, to go stand by the water, to go to the park, to go to the zoo. I remember one of the best days I had was a day I took off and went to Herman Park. And I sat near the train station, and there's a kind of a fountain right outside that train station. Now, I didn't take my kids. I didn't take Rudy. I just took me. And I sat there and I was outside. Nature is God's first Bible. So if you want to know something about God, get in nature. If you want to know something about you, get in nature. And so I'm saying, so often when we get too focused on what we might be excited about, our vocation, our vocare, right? In doing so, we can shut out other ways that life is longing to speak to us, longing to give us guidance, longing to give us the opportunity to live as a human being.
Right.
Not a human doing alone.
Right. And so in your case, you did not listen to those signs and take those opportunities. Tell us what happened with the depression and crash and then how you began to navigate through responding to that experience.
Yeah. Well, one day I woke up one morning. Well, first of all, I remember now that for months leading up to that, I was feeling a lot of anxiety. And I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And I was so wound up, like an ever-ready bunny, and just keep winding me up, right? But I didn't know that wasn't normal for me to feel like that. And so one day, one Friday morning, I got up and I fixed breakfast for our kids like I always did because our lives were so busy. Breakfast was the only time the four of us would probably be together during the day. And so I fixed breakfast. And I got up and I was headed to go finish my makeup. And so Rudy said, baby, you want me to take the kids to school? And I said, yeah. I said, that way I can put my makeup on in the bathroom mirror instead of the rearview mirror. Now, I know I ain't the only sister who's been putting makeup on in the rearview mirror, right? And so I say goodbye to them. I hug and kiss them. They go out the door. I go to the bathroom and I finish putting on my makeup. And all of a sudden I feel really sick. And in the book, I explain it like holding a package of dry spaghetti.
Yeah.
And you just keep adding pressure, and then it begins to pop, right?
Yeah.
I literally felt that inside my body. It was like the nerves in my body were just popping and I could feel it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I called our secretary at the church and I tell her I'm not feeling well. I'm going to lay down. Maybe I've been moving around too fast this morning. And so I get in bed. I ask her, will she reschedule my appointments for the morning? I'll come in at noon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was getting ready to get in the bed. And then I had what was like an out of body experience, Amanda. I picked up the phone. I hit redial. I said, I'm not coming in. I'm not coming back. I don't know. I'm going to take a sabbatical or medical leave or something. I hung up the phone and I got in the bed and I began to sleep 18 to 20 hours every day for months.
So wait.
After about, yeah.
So at that time, when you were feeling that, when you were feeling like the spaghetti illustration that's in the book, did you feel like you were having some kind of medical emergency, or did you?
I didn't know what it was.
Processing what was happening to you.
I didn't know what it was because I didn't have words for it. I at the time, I didn't even know to use that example of the spaghetti. That came in reflection as I was learning to be.
Yeah.
But I just knew something wasn't right. And then I couldn't get out of bed. Literally, yeah. I slept 18 to 20 hours a day.
You wanted to get out of bed. You just
exactly. But I couldn't. I didn't have the capacity. Over a period of time of probably about 2 weeks, Rudy said, baby, something is wrong. You got to see a doctor, right? Mm-hmm. And so I go see the doctor. She does blood work to rule out everything she can, thyroidism, diabetes, because sometimes other illnesses will create experiences for you, right? Mm-hmm. And so then she said, I've done everything I can. I ruled out everything I can. I really think you need to see a psychiatrist. And so I did. I called a psychiatrist and I went to see her. And to this day, I cannot tell you how I drove myself to the psychiatrist's office. I didn't, even though I was sleeping all that time, I didn't realize how kind of disoriented I was. Mm-hmm. I got to her office. I saw her. And in that first visit, she diagnosed me as having had a major depressive episode. Mm-hmm. All right.
And at that time, had you even heard of a concept like that?
I knew about depression, but
right.
What the heck is a major depressive episode? What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
And so she gave me some medication. Then a bit later, I started having panic attacks, which I had never had a panic attack, so I didn't know what it was. So for me at home, I'm at home, still sleeping 18 to 20 hours a day, but every now and then the phone would ring, somebody calling to check on me or see how I was doing or whatever. And when the phone would ring, Amanda, I would shake like this inside, and I would not be able to catch my breath. Okay. And so finally, after a week or so of this, I told Rudy, I said, Rudy, every time the phone rings, I feel panicked inside, and I'm huffing, and I'm talking to him like that because he had just called me, right? Mm-hmm. And so I told him, he said, well, baby, stop answering the phone. Don't answer the phone anymore. He said, every day I'm going to call you at noon just to check on you, make sure you're okay. You'll know it's me because I'm calling at noon. So we got that system down together. And then one of my visits after that with the psychiatrist, I told her, I said, I had this weird experience. And so she said, those are panic attacks. And so she started giving me medication. So now I'm taking medicine for depression and medicine for anxiety. She told me that I can be your psychiatrist. I can make the diagnosis, but you need talk therapy. You need to see a psychotherapist. And so I immediately started seeing a psychotherapist. I saw my psychotherapist every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And again, all of this is in an effort to help me. And here's the thing, here's the trick, get back to normal.
You just want to go back to answering that phone again and running around.
All I could think of is I just want to get back to normal, get back to how I used to be. Well, let me tell you, one of the gifts of a mental health diagnosis, mm-hmm. of a physical health diagnosis, mm-hmm. anything that comes in your life that pulls the rug from under your feet, mm-hmm. is the opportunity to decide, who am I now?
That's so powerful.
All right.
Because you just highlighted you were ready to get back to normal. And what you're saying is you've got to recalibrate. There's notwithstanding what the basis was, the reasoning, why, all of that, the circumstances, the game has now changed.
I
And
love
you have to
that you
accept that.
calibrate. Yes.
And that's also, what about people who want to fight that? Because doesn't that make that experience even more difficult? Because
it does. And let me tell you why you want to get back to normal. Okay. Let me give you an example. So for the audience out there who can't relate to this at all, you go to the doctor says, I want you to take this Z-Pack for 7 days. I want you to follow this prescription every day, take this pill, right? By the 3rd day, you start feeling good.
Yeah.
And you start saying, well, shoot, I'm not gonna work. I don't need to take that pill because I feel really good. Not realizing that taking that pill every day to that point made you feel better.
Right. This is why you're feeling better.
Which is why you're feeling better.
Right.
What the ego does is the ego wants to be in charge. The ego wants to control. But what the spirit is doing is inviting us to shed that ego control of our life and to allow spirit more expansion within us. Well, however you choose to name spirit, right? There's a divine presence that's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. It's what breathes our body at night while we're asleep and we don't even know that it's orchestrating our breathing, right? That divine presence is calling us out into our most expansive self, not to be put together again like Humpty Dumpty, right? Fell off the wall, had a great fall. All the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again because they would have made Humpty just like Humpty had been. But the universe was inviting Humpty to be more than Humpty had ever been. So that's the beauty of this.
And how did you find that, how did you come to that conclusion, or because to me, in most cases, something disrupts, we use terms like disruption.
Absolutely.
Disrupts our lives.
That's right.
We want to get back onto the regularly scheduled program.
Exactly.
And until we get back on the regularly scheduled program, we consider this a disruption. We're not interested in accepting it. We're not interested in recreating ourselves because of it, because I'm not going to give that power over me, which is ego, right?
Exactly.
So how did you get there though? Because I think for a lot of us, was it the talk therapy? Was it a combination of prayer, talk therapy, and medication? Tell me a little bit.
It was a combination.
Yeah.
It was a combination of all of that. I needed all of it. I needed the medication because if the medication didn't do anything else for me, it could have been a placebo for all I know. But when that doctor said to me, in 6 to 8 weeks, we should see a measure of improvement, that gave me hope.
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes when you're dealing with like mental illness and health challenges, the absence of hope impacts our ability to heal and improve.
Exactly.
Because we don't have anything to look forward to. Exactly.
But not only did the medication and seeing her, and she was an African American, she still is, but she's no longer practicing. Her name is Dr. Shayna Lee. I mentioned her in the book. Dr. Lee helped me to know that it was okay for me to be where I was. And to treat my experience like as though I had been hit by a Mack truck. That it was going to take time for all the broken bones to heal. There's a lot of brokenness in our psyche. And it takes time for it to heal. The talk therapy helped me with that. Some various spiritual disciplines and tools helped me with that. I mentioned some of them in Learning to Be. One of them was the examine. Others was prayer. My prayer life became very intense, and it wasn't with words, because I most of the time I couldn't even think. There were times, and now this is funny because sometimes you can have so much on your mind. You go to the kitchen and you think, why am I in here? Right?
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I knew that the kids were probably coming home and I should be fixing dinner, but then I would walk into the kitchen and everything looked foreign. I didn't know where anything was. I didn't know
Just
what to even
completely
cook them.
disoriented.
Just totally disoriented. Okay. I stayed in bed so long, Amanda, I could turn my head to the left and to the right, and I would smell something and I wondered what it was. And it was me,
Mm.
because I didn't have the energy to take care of my personal hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a husband who could love me enough that he could every night get in bed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Never once said, baby, you need to take a bath, because he knew where I was.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one day laying in bed and I couldn't remember how to get up to go to the restroom.
Mm.
And so when I talk about the mind being shut down, I couldn't read, I couldn't pray. So one of the things that gave me consolation is there is a scripture that says that the Spirit interprets our moans and our groans.
Mm.
And I want to say this. I found myself sighing a lot. I go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh. When you find yourself doing that, ask yourself what's going on.
Mm.
Because those sighs are the soul saying, there's something wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
need help, right? And so, yes, it took a combination of things. As I began to feel better, I started taking classes at the Jung Center so that I could try to understand my psyche better.
Mm-hmm.
I took classes at the Cynical Sisters Retreat House because they were talking about things like the dark night of the soul and what happens when a soul literally falls apart, which is what I came to realize. I wasn't only having a physical health diagnosis, I was having a spiritual awakening that happened with the dying of the old Juanita,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there was all these dynamics going on. And basically it took me about 3 years of moving through this process of learning to be the new
Now,
Juanita.
now let me ask this question, because part of your process of learning to be the new Juanita, in your case, did you find you were very public facing? You
Yes,
know, you
yes,
were a leader, the leader of the church. You are a community leader. You are mom, you are wife, you are many different roles that require a lot of people's engagement of you.
sure.
And of course, were you concerned that there would be judgment of you? Were you concerned about expectations of you and not being able to meet the expectations? Tell me a little bit about how you were able to balance the external perspective with what you were dealing with internally, spiritually, physically, and otherwise.
So Joseph Campbell talks about the myth, the archetypes of our experiences of showing up in the world. I would really encourage people to watch that on PBS. He's talking about myths and archetypes.
Y'all heard that? The myth? That's the name. Okay.
Okay, and archetypes. And so what I came to realize, first of all, Amanda, I got to say this. My faith community, my denomination, and my co-pastor Rudy were generous in that I was given time to heal. But now I also know I was given time to do this deep work, not knowing then that it was going to be because I needed to share the deep work with others who weren't going to have the luxury of the time off from work that I was given.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happened for me is that I came to realize that many of us have crashed, but we still have to get up and go to work, and we still have to feed the children, and we still have to comb hair.
Mm-hmm.
You got me?
Mm-hmm.
In many cultures, men are given the right of initiation. They're given the right to go out on the quest to, quote, find themselves.
Mm-hmm.
For women,
Mm-hmm.
often we get sick.
Mm.
We get a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens.
You had a cancer diagnosis as well.
Cancer diagnosis, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I now believe and understand, I have a deep knowing that all sickness is because the mind has been trying to get our attention and we aren't paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so the body says, well, I'll try to help. I'll see if I can do something to help get this person's attention that they need to change their life. They need to change the programming. They need a new default system, right? They need a new way of being. And so, and what I have seen also is I've seen people destroy their lives. I've seen great marriages fall apart because one person went and had an affair, because that person was under so much internal pressure. They didn't know how to say, help, I need help. I can't function. I can't breathe. I need some help. Somebody help me. And they don't know what kind of help they need either, right? If anyone in your audience is feeling that, see a therapist.
Yeah. And so many times in our community, people are hesitant. I think it's becoming more widespread, but certainly I think we've got a lot of room to grow and traction that we need to make in regards to mental health and being proactive about, therapy and all of the elements that can help us become more whole and to be.
Right. Yes.
Not to use the pun to the book.
You can use that pun as much as you want.
Learning to be.
And the scriptures, for those of your audience who are people who respect and appreciate scripture, the text tells us a wise person will seek counsel. All right. And so you get counsel from people who can help you with that area. If it's a physical complaint, you go to a physical doctor. If it's a problem with your automobile, you go to an auto mechanic. If it's a problem with your roof, you see a roofer. If it's a problem with your head, then see a therapist.
Right.
Because often it is our thinking that has gotten us in the positions we're in. And so the challenge is to begin to challenge our beliefs. What have I been believing about myself that makes me think I don't need rest, that makes me think I don't need to play, that makes me think I don't need fun, that makes me think that I shouldn't go hang out with some girlfriends every now and then, that makes me think I don't need a vacation, that makes me think I don't need some time alone because I'm an introvert and I need my time alone, right? Yeah. What makes me think that I can override all of those safeguards for being? And then I'm going to make it all right if I just keep pushing through, right? Wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Sometimes it's a forced stop.
Exactly.
An abrupt stop.
Mine was a forced stop. Exactly. It was a forced stop.
So just in the interest of time, I want to make sure I cover this element of learning to be and how did you add to the repertoire of things that are all things Pastor Juanita does and add author to that list? Was that a challenge that you had always perceived you might pursue, or was that just immediately, or an immediate response to the experience that you had and you felt moved to write the book? And what was that experience like for you? Did you get discouraged in this journey of becoming an author? How has this journey been for you? So tell us a little bit about moving into this space, but now with the consciousness of who the new Pastor Juanita would be, and sharing how you made the journey now into becoming an author who's got speaking tour all over the country, and yet and still gets to sit in her living room because of Zoom. Thank goodness.
God is good. All right. Yeah, the journey. Okay, let me tell you one of the things that was really pivotal that happened to me during this time. First of all, when your mind gets blank, it's easier to hear God. All right. And so one of the things that happened for me during that, all of that silence and solitude, because remember, my family is still going on. Everybody's going to school. My husband's going to work. So basically 8 hours a day, I was at home alone. That gave me a silent retreat, if you will. All right. And so during that time, one of the things that really was pivotal for me, and a second place that gave me hope, was that the Spirit said that, and I came to find out later, it's a scripture in Isaiah 45. It says, I'll give you the treasures out of this darkness, secret riches from hidden places. And when I heard that, I'll give you the treasures out of this darkness. And oh, I must be in school. I might need to take notes. And so it started that when I could begin to write again and process by thinking things like, how to write down stuff, then I started writing things down in my journals, thinking, okay, I'm going to need to know this stuff. Partially, I came to realize I needed to know it for me, right? Because I remember one time my therapist said, Juanita, you'll have to live with this diagnosis for the rest of your life. And at the time I was horrified that, because what I thought he was saying is, I'm going to have to feel like this for the rest of my life. I'll be in this space for the rest of my life. But that wasn't what he was saying. What he was saying to me is, there's some lessons you're going to have to learn. And if you'll learn them, you'll be able to live with this diagnosis. Right? That's a different message. That's a different message. And so I wrote it the first time as journals. I wrote it the second time about 10 years ago. And I hired a ghostwriter, thinking that I didn't feel qualified to write this. Didn't think I had the skill and the tools to write it. So I worked with a ghostwriter. And when the ghostwriter finished it, it didn't have my voice.
You are, who is this?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, matter of fact, that's exactly what I said. Who is this? Right?
Yeah.
And that's nothing against ghostwriters, because a lot of ghostwriters are, they're given that kind of liberty. But I knew this had to be more intimate than what was showing up on the paper. And so 3 years ago, when my grandson was born, and let me tell you a little something behind the scenes. For 10 years, I have a friend who happens to be now my editor for the book with InterVarsity Press, my publisher. We would see each other at a conference every year for 10 years. She would say, Juanita, we need your book. We need your voice. People need to hear your story. She would tell me that every year for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And so 3 years ago, my husband and I agreed that I would go and live in Indianapolis for 6 months, because our children didn't have, there was a 1-year waiting list for daycare in Indianapolis at the time. And so my husband would fly back and forth. He'd come for a week and then go, usually come back to Houston for 3 weeks, because all this was before Zoom and COVID and all this, right? And so he was holding down the church and I was helping to care for our grandson. And when I got there, the Spirit said, you're here to take care of your grandson and you're here to write this book. And so I became like those writers you hear about, who get up early in the morning at 3 o'clock and they write something down, or who put the baby down to sleep and then you write something. And so then it took on that kind of life. But the beauty of having written it in my journals is that I could refer back to some of that. And I had all along had this working title that kept me kind of focused. So I would say to somebody who's thinking about writing, write the way you can, not the way you can't. I find that for a long time, I would ask writer friends of mine, how did you write this book? Tell me your secret. So maybe I can use your secret to write my book. I find almost every writer has a different method, a different rhythm. But the main thing is start.
Yes.
Whether you get you some blank paper, or you start on your computer, or you start by recording audio in your phone. And now, you can record audio and it'll transcribe it for you. So however you need to start, just start. Because everybody has a story that can impact and empower somebody else's life. We just don't know who the person is that needs to hear how we got over, how we got through, and how we learned to be.
Well, I love it. I love the book, and I love the fact that you have created this new platform to empower people into learning to be, and with the book. And so for those who are interested in trying to get a copy, where can they find it, and where can they learn more about you and what you've been up to? Because I think you've been doing some events as well.
That's right. Yeah, I've got a lot going on, but thank God, COVID has made life real easy. I do everything in this chair.
That's right. That's right. You're in
So
Houston one
I'm
minute,
grateful.
you're in New York the next, and
That's right.
all of it in your chair.
Been on CNN from this chair, you know.
In the chair.
So it's been a gift. And so yeah, the book can be purchased anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those places. Any place that you would normally buy a book. If they don't have it, ask them to buy it. And if you can't afford the book, ask your local library to order the book. Okay, I found that out. And so it's available readily. Or you can go through InterVarsity Press, my publisher. But join me, follow me, join me on social media. My name is Juanita Rasmus, JuanitaRasmus, or you can go to JuanitaRasmus.com. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, what's the other one? Instagram. And so I've got a presence there, and I try to make it a space that's encouraging and life-giving for people.
Yep.
I'm excited about the possibilities. I've been so grateful. I've been able to speak at so many different book clubs and Bible studies and women's groups and just all kinds of spaces that I probably wouldn't have been able to get to had I had to fly to all these places, you know?
Right.
And so it's been a blessing for me to hear people say that this book has invited them to go back to therapy or to go to therapy, or that the book resonated in ways that validated things that people had been thinking and feeling, but didn't know how to say out loud, or were concerned to say out loud. And I named it for them, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful. I'm just really grateful for how Learning to Be is showing up. And I want to say thank you to you, Amanda, for helping me to further get Learning to Be out into the world.
No, you bet. And let me say this is completely aligned with what this podcast is all about, which is to empower people with the tools that's going to help them to be successful, to defy the odds, to overcome obstacles, and in this case, to learn to be in this case, in terms of every experience they've had, being able to get tools that will help them navigate through those experiences. And even in this case, you help to foreshadow some of the things that people may not be paying attention to so much, and give them those tools to say, oh, do I need to take a pause or a timeout? And take some preventative approaches to that as well. So I am super excited that your book is out. I'm super excited about the work that you're doing. I love getting to add author to the many things I use to describe you. And I just thank you so much for not only giving of yourself in terms of the community and the church, and the philanthropic activity that you do, but also giving of your personal story in a way that is a testimony that will guide people, empower people, and uplift them. So thank you for being my guest. We could talk all day, but I have to wrap this episode up. So again, you know where to find her. She's on all social media platforms. Make sure you get the book today. And again, that wraps up this episode of the Edwards Empowerment Talks. Until next time.
I would like to extend a special thank you to the Texas Signal for its support of our podcast.